A quiet day at the Grove. Samuel Lester had always prided himself on his ability to connect with people. Working as a waiter at the Grove, a charming bistro nestled in the heart of the city, he had honed the skill of making each customer feel like the most important person in the room. He wasn't just serving food. He was providing an experience. The Grove wasn't the most glamorous of restaurants, but it had a loyal clientele who came back, not just for the food but for the service, a service that Samuel delivered with an effortless grace. The bistro had its regulars, people who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for the warm atmosphere and the familiar faces. Samuel could always count on Mrs. Anderson, the retired schoolteacher, to order her regular, the chicken salad with a side of soup, and Mr. Harris, the lawyer, would always ask for a glass of merlot and a seat by the window. Samuel knew their preferences as well as he knew the back of his hand, and he treated everyone the same. Whether they were a local businessman in a tailored suit or a teenage student in sneakers. That Tuesday afternoon, though, was different. The air inside the Grove felt unusually still, almost peaceful. The usual hum of voices had quieted, and the faint melody of jazz floated through the restaurant, adding to the serene atmosphere. It was a rare lull for a place that normally buzzed with activity, but for Samuel, it gave him a moment of respite. He stood by the bar, wiping glasses with a cloth, when the doorbell rang and broke the silence. It was a small jingle, but it sounded more pronounced in the stillness. Samuel glanced up and saw a teenage boy walk in. The boy was accompanied by two men in dark suits, the kind that had an air of quiet authority. Samuel immediately noted the formality of the entourage. It was clear this wasn't just another customer. The boy's presence exuded a certain familiarity, but Samuel couldn't quite place it at first. He didn't have to guess for long. As the trio approached, the two suited men stayed a few steps behind, almost as though they were guarding him. The boy himself was tall, slender, with a mop of light brown hair that fell messily over his forehead. His face had a youthful, innocent quality, though his sharp, calculating eyes suggested a maturity beyond his years. Samuel's heart skipped a beat as realization hit. This was Barron Trump. Although he had seen the boy on television and in the news, Samuel had never expected to meet him in person. But he didn't let the recognition show. His job was to treat every guest with the same level of respect, no matter their background or celebrity status. Samuel's demeanor remained unchanged, warm and professional as he approached the table. "Welcome to the Grove," Samuel said, his voice even and friendly. "Table for one." Barron nodded, his expression neutral, though there was a brief flicker of appreciation in his eyes. Samuel led him to a booth by the window, offering him the best seat in the house. As Barron slid into the booth, the two suited men hovered near the entrance, keeping their distance, but clearly keeping watch. "Take your time," Samuel said, handing Barron a menu. He made a mental note to avoid unnecessary small talk. It wasn't about making the boy uncomfortable, but about maintaining a level of professionalism. Barron briefly glanced at the menu, scanning it with an air of indifference. His eyes stopped on a simple cheeseburger and soda. Samuel could sense that the boy wasn't particularly concerned with what he was eating. It wasn't about the food. It was about getting away from the circus of his public life. Samuel nodded politely and turned toward the kitchen, making sure to deliver the food as efficiently and discreetly as possible. As Samuel began to prepare the order, he was interrupted by the voice of his manager, Mr. Walter. "Do you know who that is?" Walter asked sharply, his gaze cutting toward the table where Barron sat. Samuel glanced over at the booth, his hand still hovering over a tray of dishes. "Yes, that's Barron Trump." Walter's expression changed slightly, but only for a moment. "You need to understand something," Walter said, lowering his voice. "That kid's family. They're powerful. His father is Donald Trump, the former president. And that means this is no ordinary customer. Do you get what I'm saying?" Samuel nodded, keeping his calm. He had heard rumors about celebrities and high-profile individuals frequenting the restaurant, and he had always handled those situations with care. "I understand, Mr. Walter." Walter gave him a pointed look. "Good. Just stick to the basics. No small talk, no unnecessary interactions. Keep it professional. And for heaven's sake, don't make us look bad." Samuel's mind raced with the weight of the unspoken expectation. It wasn't that he had any intention of doing anything inappropriate. It was just the added pressure of knowing who Barron was. Yet, Samuel's commitment to his work and his belief that every person, no matter their background, deserved the same treatment remained unchanged. He would treat Barron Trump the same way he treated anyone else, respectfully and kindly. As he brought the cheeseburger and soda to the table, he noticed how quiet Barron was. The boy didn't make small talk or engage in pleasantries. Just a simple thank you as Samuel set the food down in front of him. Samuel nodded in acknowledgement, stepping back and returning to his duties, but his eyes kept drifting toward the booth. There was something about Barron's presence that intrigued him. Despite being the son of a high-profile family, Barron seemed, in a way, more normal than most people Samuel served on a daily basis. But Samuel's attention was also drawn to something else. As Barron finished his meal and began to gather his things, Samuel noticed a small leather wallet sitting on the booth beside him. Without thinking, he crossed the room, calling out softly, "Excuse me, you forgot this." Barron turned with a flicker of surprise on his face as Samuel handed him the wallet. "Thank you," Barron said quietly, his voice almost barely above a whisper. Samuel smiled, his heart feeling a little lighter. It was a small thing, but he had helped someone. And in a world that often felt chaotic and impersonal, that mattered. But as Barron and his bodyguards prepared to leave, Samuel felt the weight of Walter's gaze on him from across the room. It was the kind of look that made his stomach drop. Despite his good intentions, Samuel had broken the unspoken rules. He had engaged in a personal interaction. A simple one, to be sure, but it was more than Walter thought was acceptable. Later that evening, as the last customers trickled out of the grove, Samuel was summoned to Mr. Walter's office. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. "You're fired," Walter said, his voice cold and final. The words cut through the stillness of the room like a knife. Samuel stood frozen, his mind racing. "What? Why?" "You broke protocol," Walter replied, his tone as devoid of emotion as his face. "You could have jeopardized the reputation of this restaurant. You're lucky we didn't lose business over this." Stunned, Samuel walked out of the restaurant that evening with a heavy heart. He had done nothing wrong, but it didn't matter. His years of loyalty, his dedication to providing excellent service, none of it seemed to matter now. That night, as Samuel sat in his small apartment, staring at his laptop, job listings blurred in front of him. He had built a life here in the city, working at the Grove, but now that was gone. He wasn't sure where to go from here. His confidence had been shaken. What had started as a simple, kind gesture had cost him everything. The call. The following morning, Samuel awoke early, the sun barely peeking over the skyline. He had spent much of the previous night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling of betrayal that hung over him. The Grove, the place he had worked at for the better part of a decade, was no longer a part of his life. Samuel had always prided himself on being a dedicated employee, going above and beyond, always putting his best foot forward. But now, he was just another person who had lost their job for reasons that felt unjust, and to make matters worse, he had no idea where to turn next. The apartment he had lived in for the past 3 years felt colder today, dear. It wasn't just the lack of his usual routine. It was the sudden, jarring realization that everything he had worked for had evaporated in an instant. The kitchen, which had once been filled with the sounds of breakfast preparations, now seemed eerily quiet. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock him, reminding him of the solitude he now faced. He poured himself a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the bustling city below. The world kept moving, and he was stuck in limbo, unsure of what his next move would be. Samuel had always been a man of principle. He believed in fairness, in treating everyone with the same level of respect, and in doing the right thing, no matter how small the gesture. But now, all of that felt meaningless in the face of his firing. He had done something kind, something simple, and yet it had cost him everything. The foam on his kitchen counter buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Samuel's hand froze mid-motion, a wave of uncertainty washing over him. It was the first time his phone had rung since he'd left the Grove, and for a moment, he hesitated. It could be another job opportunity, or maybe just a telemarketer. But something about it felt different. Reluctantly, he reached for the phone and glanced at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was one he recognized. New York. His pulse quickened. "Hello," Samuel answered, his voice a little more strained than he had intended. "Is this Samuel Lester?" A deep, gravelly voice asked on the other end of the line. "Yes," Samuel replied, his heart racing now. There was something familiar about the voice, but he couldn't place it. "This is Donald Trump," the voice continued, matter-of-factly, as though this was the most normal thing in the world. "I hear you've had a bit of trouble recently." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The name seemed impossible to process. Donald Trump, the former president, the businessman, the father of the boy who had been sitting at his table just the day before. "Mr. Trump," Samuel stammered, trying to keep his composure. I don't understand. How did you?" "Relax, Samuel," Trump interjected, his voice more casual now. "I've been made aware of what happened. Barron told me about you. He said you helped him when he forgot his wallet. And now, here you are, out of a job for doing the right thing." Samuel sat back in his chair, a mixture of confusion and disbelief swirling in his mind. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to anything, let alone a phone call from one of the most famous figures in the world. "Look, I don't know what happened at your restaurant, but I can tell you this," Trump continued. "From what Barron said, you did exactly what any decent person would do. You showed him respect. That's something I value." Samuel's head was spinning. The words he had just heard didn't seem real. How could Barron have told his father about such a small interaction? And why was Donald Trump calling him? I appreciate that, Mr. Trump, but I don't know what to say. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just didn't want him to forget his wallet." Trump's voice softened, though there was an unmistakable authority behind his words. "You're a man of integrity, Samuel. That's rare these days, and that's why I'm calling. I'm going to make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. We don't always get the respect we deserve, especially in the world of business. But in this case, I think it's important to fix things." Samuel didn't know how to respond. He had spent years working in the service industry, never imagining that a random act of kindness would lead to something like this. He had never been one to seek out attention or recognition. Yet here he was, on the phone with the man who had once been the leader of the free world, hearing words of encouragement from someone he never thought would care. "What exactly do you mean, Mr. Trump?" Samuel asked, still trying to process what was happening. "I'm going to help you find a new opportunity," Trump said, his tone resolute. "I've got connections, people who can help you land something better. You've got a lot to offer, and I don't want to see you go back to square one just because of some petty mistake. It's time for you to move on to bigger things, Samuel." The words felt surreal. Samuel couldn't quite grasp what was happening. Was this a joke? Was someone playing a prank on him? But the sincerity in Trump's voice left little room for doubt. I don't know what to say," Samuel replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you. I don't know how this is all going to work out, but I appreciate it. I really do." "You're welcome," Trump said. "You've got potential. Just make sure you don't let this setback define you. You've got a lot of good left to do in this world, Samuel." The call ended shortly after that, and Samuel sat there in stunned silence. His phone still felt warm against his ear, but the world around him seemed to have shifted. In one phone call, everything had changed. He had gone from being just another fired waiter to someone who was being actively sought after by one of the most influential men in the world. The enormity of it was almost too much to comprehend. As he placed the phone down on the counter, Samuel's mind raced. What now? Was he really about to embark on a new journey? Was this his second chance? He had no idea where it would lead, but one thing was certain: his life was no longer defined by the Grove. It was time to move forward, to see what opportunities awaited him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt a glimmer of hope. A new opportunity. For days after the call from Donald Trump, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. It had been surreal, like something out of a dream. The echo of Trump's voice on the other end of the line still rang in his ears. "I'm going to help you find a new opportunity," he had said, and those words, though comforting, also held an immense weight. It was one thing to hear a promise from someone you knew, someone who had your back, but to hear it from a man of such influence, a man who had been at the pinnacle of power, Samuel wasn't sure how to process it. Despite his uncertainty, Samuel tried to keep his life moving forward. He had spent the last few days responding to job listings, applying for anything that seemed like a good fit. But none of the opportunities felt right. None of them had the allure that working at the Grove had once held. He had spent nearly a decade there, building relationships, learning the rhythms of the restaurant, and perfecting his craft. The Grove wasn't just a place of employment. It was a part of his life, a place where he had truly made a difference. But now, everything had changed. Samuel was no longer just a waiter. He was a man with a lifeline, a connection to someone who could change his future. And as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the email from Trump's office, he realized that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The email was simple but direct. "Mr. Lester," it began. "As discussed, we've arranged a meeting for you at Trump Tower this Friday. Please be there at 2 p.m. Come prepared to discuss your future opportunities. You've made an impression on my son, and I believe you've got the potential to make a real impact." Samuel had read the email several times, his eyes scanning the words as though they might suddenly change. The idea of meeting with someone of Trump's caliber, in Trump Tower no less, seemed almost beyond his reach. He had never considered himself someone with aspirations of grandeur. He was a man of simple tastes, a good meal, a decent conversation, a respectful atmosphere. Yet here he was, being called to the headquarters of one of the most famous names in the world. The morning of the meeting, Samuel was a bundle of nerves. His usual confidence was replaced by a quiet anxiety. He dressed carefully, not wanting to come off as underdressed, but he didn't want to be too formal either. He opted for a simple gray blazer, a crisp shirt, and a pair of slacks. The outfit felt like a reflection of the man he had always tried to be. Respectable, but not flashy. He caught the subway downtown, the ride long and filled with the quiet hum of commuters lost in their own thoughts. As he emerged from the station and made his way to Trump Tower, the sheer scale of the building hit him. It was towering, gleaming with glass windows that reflected the sky. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt out of place. He had never been in such an imposing structure, and it made him feel like a small fish in a very big pond. When he entered the lobby, a security guard immediately approached him, checking his name and directing him to the elevator. The ride up to the 26th floor was quiet and uneventful, but with each passing second, Samuel's nerves grew. He had no idea what was about to happen, but one thing was clear. He was no longer in the world of waiters and diners. He was about to enter a world of power and influence. As the elevator doors opened, Samuel was greeted by a polished receptionist who escorted him down a long hallway. The walls were adorned with large framed portraits of Trump's various accomplishments, his hotels, his businesses, his political career. It was a world Samuel knew little about, but a world that was now drawing him in. At the end of the hallway, a large office door stood open. Inside, sitting behind a sleek wooden desk, was Donald Trump himself. He rose from his chair as Samuel stepped inside, offering him a firm handshake. "Mr. Lester, it's good to finally meet you in person," Trump said, his voice warm but commanding. "Barron told me you're a man of integrity, and that's something I respect. You're the kind of person we need in this world, someone who doesn't take shortcuts, someone who does things the right way, no matter the cost." Samuel, still reeling from the surreal nature of the moment, nodded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Trump. I don't know what to say." Trump gestured toward a chair, inviting Samuel to sit. "Relax. This isn't a formal interview. I just want to get to know you better. I've heard a lot about you, Samuel. Barron told me about how you helped him with his wallet the other day, and I have to say, I respect that. You didn't make a big deal out of it, but you did the right thing. That's the kind of person I want to surround myself with." Samuel shifted in his seat, still unsure how to respond. He had never been someone to seek attention or accolades. He just did what he thought was right, always with a sense of humility. But hearing Trump speak like this, it made him realize that sometimes doing the right thing could lead to unexpected opportunities. "Thank you," Samuel said again, this time with a little more confidence. "I just wanted to help." Trump leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning Samuel thoughtfully. "Well, helping people is a valuable trait, Samuel. And it's exactly why I'd want to offer you a position. I've got a project coming up, something big, and I need someone with your skill set. Someone who understands people, who can connect with them in a way that's rare in this industry. You'll be working with some high-profile clients, managing events, making sure everything runs smoothly. I think you'd be perfect for it." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. A position with Trump. A project that would involve high-profile clients. It was all too much to process. "I don't know what to say," Samuel repeated, his mind struggling to keep up with the rapid turn of events. "I've never done anything like this before. I'm just a waiter." Trump smiled, leaning forward. "That's exactly why I think you'll do well. You understand people, Samuel. You've spent years listening to them, helping them feel valued, even when they're just sitting down to a meal. That's a rare skill, one that most people don't have. But it's exactly what you'll need in this new role. So, what do you say? Will you give it a shot?" For a long moment, Samuel didn't speak. He could feel his mind racing, trying to reconcile everything that had happened. The Grove, his firing, the phone call from Trump. Now this, a job offer from one of the most powerful men in the world. It was an opportunity, a chance he had never dreamed of. And though he was scared of failing, scared of stepping out of his comfort zone, he knew deep down that he couldn't pass it up. "I'll do it," Samuel said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. Trump nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll start the paperwork today, and I'll have my people get in touch with you. Welcome to the team, Samuel. I'm glad to have you on board." As Samuel left Trump Tower later that afternoon, the weight of the decision settled on him. He was no longer just a man who had lost his job. He was someone on the verge of something much bigger. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The transition. Samuel's first few weeks after the meeting with Donald Trump felt like they were unfolding in slow motion. The moment he walked out of Trump Tower that day, he had entered a new world, one that was unfamiliar, vast, and daunting. No longer just a waiter in a modest restaurant, Samuel had been thrust into an entirely new realm. His life, which had once been filled with the simple rhythms of service and hospitality, was now charged with a new sense of purpose, and yet that very sense of purpose was mingled with an undercurrent of doubt. He was not just adjusting to a new job, he was adjusting to a completely different way of thinking and being. Gone were the quiet, intimate settings of the Grove, where every table had a story, and every guest was treated as family. Now his days were filled with meetings, strategies, and high-level discussions about events and client relations. Every task he undertook felt monumental, like he was being held to a higher standard. A standard he wasn't sure he was fully equipped to meet. The first day at the new office was nothing short of overwhelming. When Samuel arrived at the sleek, glass and steel building where he would be working, he was greeted by a team of professionals who immediately set to work, briefing him on the details of his new role. He had been hired to oversee high-profile events, conferences, fundraisers, and gatherings for influential clients from the worlds of business, politics, and entertainment. It was a far cry from his former life, where his interactions were largely limited to patrons at the restaurant, people seeking a quiet escape from their daily lives. There was a certain pressure in the air as he met his new colleagues, people who were well-dressed, well-spoken, and accustomed to the high-stakes world of business. Samuel couldn't help but feel like an outsider, someone who had stumbled into this world by sheer luck. He was surrounded by men and women who seemed to be natural fits for the work, their confidence radiating from them as they talked about contracts, venues, and VIPs. But Samuel, he was still grappling with the enormity of it all. "Don't worry, Samuel. You'll get the hang of it," a woman named Maria, who had been assigned as his mentor, told him on his first day. She was an experienced event planner, her demeanor calm and controlled. She could see the nerves that flickered in Samuel's eyes, and she offered him a reassuring smile. "It's not as hard as it seems once you get into the rhythm of things." Samuel nodded, though inside, his uncertainty was gnawing at him. He had always been confident in his ability to read people, to understand what made them tick, but the stakes here were so much higher. He couldn't afford to make mistakes. These weren't just any clients. These were power players, people who held influence in the very world he had barely begun to understand. That first week, Samuel found himself buried in a mountain of paperwork, contracts, schedules, timelines. Every event seemed like a labyrinth of details, and the pressure to deliver was suffocating. He spent his nights combing through event reports and project outlines, trying to prepare for each task, but the weight of it all seemed unending. His phone rang constantly, each call a reminder that the clock was ticking, and that people were depending on him to make things run smoothly. In the midst of the chaos, Samuel found solace in the small moments, the quiet exchange with a colleague, the feeling of accomplishment when a task was completed successfully, even if it was something as simple as making a phone call or finalizing a booking. Each victory, no matter how small, gave him a brief moment of peace. But the true test of his new position came when the first event he was tasked with overseeing loomed on the horizon. The event was a charity gala being held at a prestigious hotel in Manhattan. It was a black-tie affair, meant to raise funds for various causes, supported by high-profile celebrities and business leaders. Samuel was assigned to oversee the event's logistics, managing the schedule, coordinating with the caterers, and ensuring the flow of the evening went off without a hitch. The pressure on him was immense. This wasn't just about making sure the guests were happy. This was about creating an experience that would leave a lasting impression, an experience that had the potential to make or break the reputation of the organization that had hired them. The days leading up to the gala were a whirlwind. Samuel spent hours on the phone with vendors, reviewing contracts, and making last-minute adjustments. Maria, ever the professional, was by his side, offering guidance and support as he navigated the many moving parts of the event. There was a constant sense of urgency, a need to be constantly thinking several steps ahead. It wasn't just the logistics that Samuel had to manage. It was the egos, the personalities of the clients, the expectations that seemed to grow with every passing minute. One of the most challenging aspects of the job was dealing with the clients themselves. Samuel had always prided himself on his ability to make people feel at ease, but this was different. These were people who expected the world to revolve around them. And if one detail went wrong, they wouldn't hesitate to let everyone know. Samuel had to become adept at reading between the lines, understanding unspoken cues, and managing expectations before they escalated into full-blown crisis. The night before the gala, Samuel found himself lying in bed, unable to sleep. His mind raced with 100 different concerns. Did he have all the details in place? Had he double-checked everything? What if something went wrong? At that moment, his phone buzzed, breaking the silence of the night. It was a message from Maria. "You've got this, Samuel. Just remember what we talked about. Focus on the big picture, and everything else will fall into place." He read the message several times, the words offering a small bit of comfort in the storm of his thoughts. It wasn't just about the event anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could thrive in this new world. He wasn't just going to let his life be defined by one mistake. He was going to show everyone, including himself, that he belonged in this world. The day of the gala arrived with all the usual excitement and chaos that came with such a high-profile event. As Samuel walked into the hotel, the enormity of the task at hand hit him again. The ballroom was already being set up, elegant tables adorned with fine china, floral arrangements that filled the room with sweet scents, and staff scurrying about, ensuring everything was perfect. Samuel's heart began to race, but he took a deep breath. This was it, his moment to prove that he wasn't just a former waiter. He was someone capable of handling anything that came his way. The event itself was a blur of activity. There were moments of near disaster, a catering error that almost led to a shortage of appetizers, a celebrity guest who nearly missed the red carpet due to a delayed driver, and an unforeseen issue with the lighting. But Samuel, with the calm he had honed over years of dealing with demanding restaurant patrons, was able to keep everything under control. When something went wrong, he didn't panic. He simply found a solution. By the end of the night, the gala had been a resounding success. The clients were happy, the donors were pleased, and the event had raised more money than anyone had anticipated. Samuel stood at the back of the ballroom, watching the final moments unfold as the last of the guests left. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of accomplishment. The task was completed. The pressure had been immense, but he had risen to meet it. Maria found him a few minutes later, her face breaking into a smile. "You did it, Samuel. You really did." Samuel smiled back, though he was too exhausted to speak. He had done it, but it wasn't just about the event. It was about proving that he could succeed in this new life, that he could handle the pressure, that he wasn't just the waiter who had helped a boy with a forgotten wallet. He was someone who had earned a place in a world that had once seemed so far beyond his reach. And as he stepped out of the ballroom into the cool night air, Samuel realized something profound. This was only the beginning.